Uncle Doug.
Uncle Dan.
You know what? I sometimes when I was growing up, I'd look at my mom and I'd be like, I didn't ask to be born. And it's true. That is a fact.
Yeah.
I did not, in fact, ask to be born, unless you go by the Mormon theology, in which case I did.
You did.
So
you did. It's in that documentary called Saturday's Warrior, if you haven't seen it.
such a beautiful, beautiful work.
Yeah.
That one is. But, you know, there are questions about whether or not, about birth and about what should and shouldn't happen. And I think Uncle Mark is here to tell us a story about that. Is that true, Uncle Mark?
Good news, guys. There's a science for that, and I'm going to tell you all about it. And by the end, I bet you'll be convinced.
Of science?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, well, of this particular science. I think you're going to be very excited by it.
I already am.
So you know, guys, as we've said on the show before, woo is a resting place many a good person might take solace in after they've fled woo's insane, abusive older sister, religion. Now, we've said if religion is the opiate of the masses, then woo is the methadone of the masses. and this week's woo is a particularly deadly methadone. Most of the woo we cover doesn't have much of a body count, though they're all potentially harmful. This week's woo, out for which to watch, does it have a body count? And that's because this week's woo is eugenics. Often more accurately referred to as scientific racism.
It's better when it's backed by science.
Yes, and racism.
Yeah.
So now, dear listener, some of you might be thinking that eugenics is actually the academic field of study about your friend Eugene, who's semi-retired but keeps a few shifts at the airport to keep his benefits package active. And as interesting as Eugene surely is, it's actually not about Eugene. It's never about Eugene. So, no, eugenics comes from the Greek simply meaning good or well born, and who could be against people being born well. But eugenics is really the idea that people can be bred into a higher state of physical and intellectual being by selective breeding, and a whole bunch of other shit that falls under that umbrella, like comparative racial study, the relative values of the disabled, and a list of nightmares we can essentially just call the 20th century. It was founded, rather unhelpfully, we'll discover as time has worn on, by a cousin of Charles Darwin.
Is that true?
That's hilarious.
God.
Yeah, and inspired by some of the works of Darwin. And he's a guy named Francis Galton in 1883. And that's right, an air quote, science that has led to the death of millions of human beings and the torture of many millions more was founded by a cousin of our great satanic Lord Darwin, to whom we atheists sacrifice our multiracial, non-binary children at the abortionacle every year on Gay Pride Eve, as we read backwards from his diabolical Bible on the origin of the species, about how variations in the beaks of Galapagos finches may explain how life on Earth has changed over time. Not helpful.
So is this?
Can someone please come up with a place called an actual abortionacle? Because that is gorgeous. What a beautiful turn of phrase you have, Uncle Mark.
Thank you. I do have a way with terrible words, don't I?
We should. Is this the cousin that he married? Or I guess it's not. Is it?
No. That kind of thing wasn't considered eugenically allowable at the time, as it was a boy cousin.
His cousin and brother-in-law, and also his uncle.
But he was a half-cousin, whatever that means, or a step-cousin or something. So I guess that matrimony could have been allowed under the laws of eugenics. But that sort of thing is particularly singled out, as you'll see in a minute. Now, remember, as we've discussed with topics like John Harvey Kellogg in episode 103, or even the absurdity of the hollow earth in episode 52, the 19th century was awash in terrible pseudosciences and balderdash that have only been revealed as such with the passage of time and the advancement of real science.
Right.
A lot of people who you would think should have known better, at least on moral grounds, if not scientific grounds, believed in the principles of eugenics and the very, very slippery slopes those ideas teetered upon. And while there are a few ideas that eugenics... I should be selected out for my cough.
You're right.
There are a few ideas that are considered eugenic that are arguably good, such as siblings and close cousins should not procreate, and that non-viable fetuses that would either die upon birth or live short, agonizing lives should be aborted, to name, well, like,
two.
The only two good ideas.
Technically, that's two.
That's two, so that's plural. And the rest of the ideas range from awful to evil. A big part of the problem of eugenics and its 100-plus year history is that it's a cudgel that gets picked up by whomever happens to be in power in a place at any given moment. This is well illustrated by the British showing up and toppling any of the dozens of non-Caucasian societies that had things the English wanted. So various factors went into the British Empire being militarily superior to, say, the Burmese, such as the mad luck of abundant resources in a temperate climate, constant military conflict with other seafaring powers forcing the development of ships and weapons other societies had no need for, a religious dogma and history demanding a kind of manifest destiny, a cultural ruthlessness, a capitalistic business culture demanding limitless resources, etc. All advantages on the battlefield, yes. Racial superiority, no. But that didn't mean that the skulls of the vanquished peoples wouldn't be stuffed with rice grains and compared to the number of grains that could be gotten into old Lord so-and-so's skull. That's literally true. Length of fingers and limbs, hair color and texture, teeth, etc. were all measured and weighed and cataloged. And what do you know, every single time the science of eugenics found that the white British ruling class were genetically superior to the Indians, the Chinese, the Burmese, every stripe of African, Himalayan, and Australian you can imagine.
I will say this: I have a lot of British blood in me, English and otherwise, and I will say I have a very large head. So
your head is we could get all the rice in your head.
My rice grain factor is through the roof.
Well, that may not be true. You have a very large head.
I have a large outside of my head.
We don't know how big your skull is.
We don't know.
Right.
The cavity inside clearly holds a minuscule little brain.
Yeah.
And as I know from many times when I've hit my head, there's a lot of padding between the two.
You've got a football helmet underneath your skin.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you could be thick of bone.
I am indeed.
So, of course, when you understand that eugenics was a conclusion in search of confirming data, you come to realize the house always wins. A quick thought experiment. If we can assume that the genetically superior of any given society come to rule it, you have quite a bit of surprising research ahead of you about, say, the histories of the ruling classes of Egypt, Spain, England, just to name a few. Remember one of the things eugenics got right? Don't fuck your cousins. That puts to bed the argument that royalty is superior to the rest of us.
Right. Royalty
has long been at base the business of cousin fucking.
Yeah, that's why the Habsburgs died of paper cuts.
That's right. Anyone who wears a crown wears it to maintain the shape of their soft skull. It's kind of like a retainer. And just to make that point a bit more agonizing for our American friends, if indeed those who rule us are our genetic superiors, we are at this moment devolving into literal jellyfish, and we are supremely fucked. The Trump clan seem unable to stand without constant conscious thought about how to do so. And their mouths are somehow rotated 90 degrees so they open vertically like a grasshopper rather than as human mouths do, making the words absurd, industry, origin, and Beyonce literally impossible to pronounce. There are other paths to power aside from genetic excellence. But here's a fun tidbit. The idea that there are superior races and that forced selective breeding can improve them is older than Darwin's cousin's idea by a lot. Plato suggested breeding a race of super Greeks. The Bible has more than a little to say about which races are the good ones. We talk about that more than a little bit here on the show.
Yes, indeed.
But the actual idea of racial hygiene, which is another name for eugenics, found traction very close to home for us fellas. Can you guess by whom? I'll give you a tiny hint. It starts with M and rhymes with Normans.
Yeah.
That's right, boys. Well before eugenics was coined as a term, the one true church on earth, dedicated to nothing other than the love of Jesus and all of God's children, was thinking about how to breed out all the human trash that polluted American society.
Well, the thing about it is that what happened was God made the darker-skinned folk darker-skinned because they were evil. And then, wait, sorry, my race relations just got completely derailed for a second there. It must be ipso facto from that they are inferior people and therefore should be somehow eugenicsed out, right?
Eugenicsed?
Like, isn't that
Eugenified.
the only
Yes.
conclusion that one could come to?
All it makes is sense.
Let me have soon-to-be Mormon apostle George Q. Cannon explain to you from the pages of his very own Mormon newspaper in 1857 exactly your point. Experience has long since taught mankind the necessity of observing certain natural laws in the propagation of animals, or stock will denigrate and finally become extinct. But strange to say, in regard to the human animal, these laws, except in certain particulars, are more or less disregarded in these latter days. The inevitable consequence is the race is degenerating.
Oh, no!
New diseases are introduced, while effeminacy and barrenness are on the increase. And worse than all, this evil condition of the body has its effects upon the mind. Strong start, he continues.
Yeah.
Doubtless it is and ought to be the duty of legislators and conservators of our race to introduce such regulations and laws and enforce them as are best calculated to develop our physical nature. A well-formed, healthy, vigorous race should be the end sought. The ancient Spartans acted upon this policy, and the happy result was the production of a nation of the noblest men and women the world ever saw.
Oh.
No diseased and effeminate person was permitted to marry and curse the world with a tainted offspring.
I love
The children of the entire republic belonged to the government, which appointed competent persons to superintend their physical and mental training. And when the fit time arrived, they married them as they saw fit, keeping constantly in view of the improvement of the race. A malformed man will have malformed mind. A well-developed intellectual brain will produce a philosophic mind. And then I'll finish up. He's got a great conclusion here. True and effective reform must begin in the marriage bed. License to marry should not, and Mormons are walking out on some very thin ice when they start talking about marriage, but you'll see why he does it. License to marry should not come from the priest, but from the physician. It will be when the law forbids the unhealthy to beget children, when it compels every healthy man to marry, when refusal to this will debar him from holding office, from voting, from suing at courts of law, from making contracts, from following any learned profession.
Holy shit.
Yeah, when it suffers no healthy girl to remain single after she becomes of proper age, when no whore shall be permitted to live, when illicit intercourse shall be punished with death, that we shall witness any improvement in the morals of the age.
Wow.
So, okay, when did he say that?
1857.
Holy fuck.
That is,
yeah.
That's remarkable. I will say this. Now I'm feeling guilty that I didn't pass my perfect genes on. I do feel a little bad.
I think the three of us have some work ahead of us.
Yeah, exactly.
Boy.
We have to kill all the whores and involuntarily bed every woman of breeding age.
Father all of the children.
God damn.
So it goes on, and like the British imperialists, the Mormons picked up the idea of eugenics to defend polygamy. Yes, we're weird, but we're white people, and wouldn't it be better if we all just fucked our way to a wider and more delightsome earthly existence?
Right.
Well, this is all just pulled from one single article written by Apostle George Q. Cannon. Purifying the blood of the saints to arrive at a wider world was a foundational Mormon principle, made abundantly clear in inarguable detail by the second prophet and real father of what is Mormonism, Brigham Young. You can listen to our story on his love of blood atonement in episode number 50. But pure white Mormon blood and racial hygiene was very much on the mind of the highly revered Mormon apostle, soon-to-be prophet Spencer W. Kimball, who in this real 1960 General Conference talk...
Yeah, I was going to say, Kimball's a lot later than George Cannon.
1960, was pleased as punch that the tawny Navajos could be made white in just a few short generations.
Yep.
And I quote, "At one meeting, a father and mother and their 16-year-old daughter were present. The little member girl, 16, sitting between the dark father and mother, and it was evident she was several shades lighter than her parents. On the same reservation, in the same hogan, subject to the same sun and wind and weather. There was the doctor in a Utah city who for 2 years had an Indian boy in his home who stated that he was some shades lighter than the younger brother just coming into the program from the reservation. These young members of the church are changing to whiteness and delightsomeness. One white elder jokingly said that he and his companion were donating blood regularly to the hospital in the hope that the process might be accelerated.
Good
Fuck
Lord.
me. Wow.
Don't fret, dirty brown people. These noble, insufferable 19-year-old virgins are here to make you whiter one pint at a time.
Oh, my God.
Well, if generating a white and delightsome utopia was the goal of Mormonism, you go to Provo, they succeeded on the white part.
Welcome to Utah. Less than delightsome, but we're working on it.
I know that quote sounds insane. You can look it up. You know what? I'll actually put a link to it in the show notes.
Yeah.
It's called The Day of the Lamanites by Spencer W. Kimball, General Conference 1960. It's only about 6 pages. Please read it. But trust me, reading the whole thing does not make it any better.
Right.
And remember, Mormonism's earliest foundation is laid on a garbage eugenic idea. That being the laughably stupid pseudo-scientific balderdash of comparative anatomy, that basically some Jews have large noses and have brown skin, some Native Americans have large noses and brown skin. Ipso facto, multo stupido, Native Americans are Jews. This foundational idea can and should be ridiculed because it's fucking ridiculous. As we know, DNA has obliterated the very first principle of the Book of Mormon. But let's leave the Mormons for a spell.
Yes, please.
And see whom else might have found this idea of the powerful being genetically ordained to be so. As I touched on, the early 20th century America was pretty consumed with eugenics. Our old friend and all-around evil piece of shit, John Harvey Kellogg, embraced it fervently, as did literal Nazi car salesman Henry Ford, as well as a host of other villains.
He sold Nazi cars?
Yeah, he did.
Volkswagen's right.
And that's true. Look up Volkswagen. So widespread was the enthusiasm for racial improvement. Even people we now consider the good guys were down with some aspects of it, like W.E.B. Du Bois, an African-American intellectual and civil rights champion, and Margaret Sanger, major feminist and early pro-abortion activist who founded Planned Parenthood. So that's not good.
Yeah.
In the U.S., eugenics had led to laws being passed that led to countless tens of thousands of, air quotes, defectives being sterilized.
Yep.
The skulls of black Americans and Native Americans, even its poor Eastern and Southern European immigrants, were found to accommodate far fewer rice grains than those of its white Protestant colonizers, and their humanity was yet again adjusted downward for this deficiency. The handicapped, the mentally ill, garden variety criminals, and the just plain poor were sterilized without consent as a matter of course. This was, by the way, just made illegal in prisons in California in 2014.
What?
The state of California was still sterilizing people involuntarily in prisons as late as 2014.
Were they still doing it, or was that just when it was made illegal?
They were, because it was still it wasn't like the mass program it had been. But it was still doing when people were put under for different kinds of surgeries. They'd wake up with, sterilized.
Oh, my God. You know what?
Yeah.
I will say this. It's a tempting road to go down. When you see some real dickheads, like when you see the Trump family, the idea of forced sterilization is a tempting one at its heart. Yeah. I get the temptation there.
Well, Dan's on the record now.
Decidedly pro-eugenics. I did not see that coming.
I don't think I said that. I think I managed to avoid saying that. Though it's true, I think I didn't say it.
He is bedeviled by the size of his head.
Listen, you small grain rice bastards. I'm the one who knows.
Some eugenics proponents even advocated gas chambers to eliminate, air quotes, defectives.
Wow.
Yes, in the United States in the 1920s. Luckily, it's cooler, larger heads prevailed.
Yes.
So all this exciting new activity in the field of might-making right in America was being closely watched overseas. One particular place that had a strong interest in prepackaged proof of the superior rice storing capacity of big white heads was, shocker, 1930s Germany. And in fact, one very interested German was being funded in his research on the subject by none other than the venerable Rockefeller Foundation's eugenics program. His name was Dr. Joseph Mengele.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, this is just a nightmare, right? So this may come as a shock to some, but a tremendous amount of the groundwork that led to the German Holocaust and its still ongoing echoes, was done right here in the US of A. The American displacement and extermination of our native population, the semi-slavery of Jim Crow and forced segregation and lynching of our black citizens, and of course our ideas about race, intelligence, and human worth were all very inspiring to a frustrated watercolorist who had big dreams and a small mustache. That's right. Hitler literally name-checked American racial brutality as a major inspiration for him.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Hitler and his Make Germany Great Again crowd took to eugenics like John Harvey Kellogg took to cutting the tips off of little boys' dicks. They could not get enough of it. So if you have the stomach for it, you can go online and find Nazi eugenic charts and propaganda. And as it always was, the, quote, evidence was designed to support a conclusion. So blue eyes and blonde hair, straight little noses and freckles are considered superior. Traits common among Eastern European Jews were consciously selected to be charted as genetically inferior. You know, it was almost as if the game was rigged because it was.
What's always shocking to me about that fact is this whole worship of the blonde-haired, blue-eyed, perfected German kid.
Yeah.
Like, you look at Hitler,
Right.
and he was very much not that.
The short, poncy, greasy,
Dark-haired,
pale, yeah.
dark-eyed, like
Jewish fellow.
Yeah.
Right? So, yeah, well, I think we're discovering in the world in the 21st century that the leaders aren't necessarily held to the same rules that their subjects are, right? So
weird.
A quick aside, but a seriously critical one. The Nazis, just like their American counterparts who were super psyched about eugenics, were not atheists. Not even a little.
Yeah.
No.
Nazism was an evolving blend of very conservative German Catholicism, the rabidly anti-Semitic Protestantism of native son Martin Luther, and, thanks mostly to really super bad guy Heinrich Himmler, a sprinkling of Norse neo-paganism that really put the wind in the master race's sails. Yes, they were superior because they were motherfucking white and currently in charge, but they were in charge because the gods, those being Yahweh, Jesus, and Odin, had built humanity thusly.
Right.
And they had good old Yankee science with the backing of the Rockefeller Foundation, Henry Ford, the U.S. Indian Health Service, and the U.S. Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, with a big technological lift from IBM to prove them right and doom millions to death because of eye color and rice grains. And this is where we all chant USA, USA, USA. So,
You're going to force me to go home and throw out all my IBM products just to boycott
pretty
that.
much.
Yeah.
And Volkswagen and Hugo Boss, and we'll keep going.
Yeah, exactly.
So the unpleasantness of World War II and the nightmare of junk science of eugenics are all gone now, I'm happy to report. Except that, no, they are not. In fact, because of the very fine people at 4chan and 8chan, Breitbart, InfoWars, Fox News, and every other uncleanable corner of the internet where slime can fester, racial hygiene is back as an idea for America's forgotten white Christian majority who are experiencing 12 million Holocausts because you just can't say fag like you used to could. So President Trump, who on camera has bragged about his, and I'm quoting, good German blood, has given new life to the 101st Mom's Basement Battalion of keyboard commandos to emerge from their subterranean ramparts, bravely don khakis and polo shirts, buy torches normally used for joyful backyard parties, and shuffle around small towns screaming, "Jews will not replace us." Pale, slightly out of breath, exhilarated by the sudden terror of not knowing where their next juice box would come from, these genetic also-rans are just the latest part of the beautiful dream that white people are superior. They were given hope by being called very fine people by another flaccid, mediocre accident of history who daily proves there is nothing genetically superior to whiteness.
Except orangeness.
Yeah, exactly. And President Good German Blood's super buddy, Jeffrey Epstein, who is, for one reason or another, dead, tried to engineer did you guys know about this?
Yeah.
He tried to engineer a eugenic sexual / birthing slavery system where no fewer than 20 selected women at a time would be carrying his seed, since humanity could not exist without a clone army of billionaire pedophiles to guide it.
Yikes.
He was so brilliant and so determined in this eugenic mission, he wanted both his head and penis frozen upon his death. This is a true, but was such a fucking genius, he didn't realize that what men make more versions of themselves with is in their balls.
Right.
not their saggy dick or their bloated head, which, as we know, is really only useful for storing the most rice. So thank you, pretty white Jesus, for the white billionaire pedophile geniuses that watch over us as we sleep. So that's eugenics, fellas, a scientific racism to support the claims of whatever race happens to be in charge at any given moment.
Oh my God, it's so not okay. Here's what's funny though. You've been in this whole report been taking it for granted that people will understand why it's not okay. And I think that one of the things about eugenics is that there are certain aspects of it that feel like that have an appeal. Like, well, why shouldn't the strongest people marry the strongest people and then create more strong, like even stronger babies? And why isn't that a good thing? Because again, all of this has a sort of a rather tempting flavor to it. You know what I mean? There's the idea of creating better humans seems like something we should all like.
Or on the other side of that same coin, when you see, a typical a large family with lots of young kids throwing temper tantrums in the theater row right behind me,
right?
You know what I mean?
Right. Well, and I even among my friends, I've heard people say, "Well, you guys should have kids because you're smart, and the smart people need to be having kids. We can't just leave it to all of the dumb." And it's just like, you are on a little bit of shaky ground there.
Okay, so you get to be the judge of who's dumb and who's smart,
right?
That's awesome.
That's kind of what we do for a living.
Yeah, well, shush.
Well,
but I will say this: even our own heroes, heroes. I'm not declaring this person to be one of my heroes, but like even guys like Dawkins, Richard Dawkins, who's he's a genetic biologist by trade. Someone needs to take away his Twitter account because at one point he tweeted that women who find out that they are carrying children with Down syndrome should all abort.
Ooh.
And it's just yikes.
And again, that gets back to the comparative use of the disabled, right?
The value of humans in general.
The value of human and their individual lives,
right?
And their freedom to live as best they can in a way of their own choosing. It just says, no, society will decide for you if you're too stupid to live,
right,
and have a child. And I think
if you have worth, we'll figure that out. Don't you worry about it. We'll sort out whether or not.
And this is not theoretical. The impetus behind the Muslim ban and the border policy of this country right now are informed by eugenic type thinking, right?
Yeah.
Trying to keep the country white to prevent the browns from getting too uppity,
too mixed in.
Yep, it's. Ugh.
Yeah, remember when this used to be a melting pot? That was the thought. We were supposed to take in everybody and
the heady days of 2015.
Right.
Yeah, but then we started stuffing skulls with rice, and before you know it, what was supposed to be a fun centerpiece has turned into a nightmare.
Well, that's and also a delicious meal for all involved, which maybe that's what we'll get to when I start talking later in the show. We'll see.
Yeah. We'll call it Rice a Racist. It'll be great. So it's a delicious treat. The San Francisco treat.
Yes,
all right,
indeed.
Well, with that, let's move on.
Let's do it.